A first-grade teacher is staring down what could be the rest of her life in prison after allegedly dealing drugs during school hours. But one of her illicit pills she allegedly dealt turned out to be deadly. 34-year-old Sarah Magid was a first-grade teacher within the Montgomery County school system in Maryland. But she found herself going from educator to inmate when she was connected to the death of a man from Washington, D.C. The case first came to light in March when the man died and investigators discovered text messages allegedly between the victim and Magid. According to court documents, the man saved Magid's name in his phone as Sarah. And back in January, the Sarah number messaged the man about a certain pill, writing, "And they're strong, so you better do half, because they're good AF." Police say that direction to use half a pill showed Magid's understanding the dangers of dealing fentanyl. The man's name hasn't been revealed, but according to reports, police identified him as a person staying in a place that served those battling drug and alcohol addictions. Investigators learned the victim had been in Montgomery County in the days leading up to his death. According to reports, the man reached out to Magid for Xanax. 2 days before his death, investigators say messages showed him planning to meet up with Magid so he could get the pills. Those pills were made to appear as if they were 30 milligrams of oxycodone. But they weren't oxycodone. Instead, the pills allegedly contained fentanyl. Soon after Magid allegedly dealt the pills, the man was found dead, and his cause of death was fentanyl toxicity. Police say after the man's death, Magid continued messaging him, as one text recovered allegedly said, "Guess you died." The victim's sister responded and said, "This is his sister. He died. You should kill yourself." The Sarah number responded by saying, "Don't blame your brother's choices on me." And the account also reportedly denied allegations they sold to the victim. Authorities reportedly put Magid under surveillance in June, but they moved in on her months later in August when she was ultimately arrested. Initially, she faced several charges for narcotics distribution, but wasn't charged in the victim's death. That would all change months later when the U.S. District Attorneys for the District of Maryland announced they were charging her federally. According to the U.S. Attorney's Office in July of this year, they even received a tip. Magid was buying and selling fentanyl and Xanax pills for at least 4 years and even dealt to people outside of the school building where she worked. And authorities were able to confirm from texts on her phone she dealt during her work hours. Now she faces charges of distributing fentanyl resulting in serious bodily injury and the death of the victim.
This is a horrific story, but I really quickly want to give thanks to our sponsors that help us continue to bring you these stories like Odoo. I'm sure a lot of you watching this might be business owners or thinking about starting a side hustle. Well, Odoo can help. Odoo is a free all-in-one business management software with tools to help you run your business. I mean, look, I'm a cat mom and I want my cat to get some brand deals. Using Odoo's website builder, I built a site for my cat Buttons in just minutes, thanks to easy tools like AI copywriting and drag and drop features. 5 minutes later, and boom, check it out. I now have buttonsthecat.odoo.com. So I want to thank Odoo for sponsoring our videos. And for our amazing viewers, you can start building your site now and get a free domain for the first year with our link, odoo.com/lcnews11. Again, that's odoo.com/lcnews11 to try Odoo now for free. We have a lot to break down, so I'm joined by a great guest in studio, and that's former prosecutor Eva Sullivan. Eva, thank you so much for being here today. What's been your general reaction to this story overall? You know, normally when we're covering kind of these bad teacher stories, it's teachers who have sexually assaulted their students, but this one's a little different. It's a teacher who was dealing drugs during school hours to the point where one of the men who took one of the drugs she dealt him died from an overdose of that being fentanyl. What is your reaction to this story?
Well, I have reactions on 2 levels. First, as a mother of an 8-month-old baby, I'm horrified. He goes to daycare, and I can't imagine a situation where one of his teachers is dealing drugs on school property. That would raise so many questions. Like, I trust the teachers at my son's daycare to take care of him, and to know that they're endangering my child, I would be floored. As a prosecutor, though, this is a slam dunk case, and one that I would use as a test case to really set the stage and send the message that we're going to take anyone from the drug distribution chain, from the lowest person down there to the cartel member, out. Like, this is not okay anywhere.
You know, this is an elementary school teacher. Talk to me a little bit about your thoughts on this double life she was living. I can imagine parents like yourself, even though I know like your child never went to that school or, you know, that was their teacher or anything like that. But I just can't even imagine what the reaction was of this double life that she was living.
As a prosecutor who's dealt with drug cases, far too often, one of the things that I saw is that when somebody was charged, that was not the first time they did it. So for her being charged with dealing drugs, it means that she was doing it for years before. This double life was going on for a very long time, and it got to the tipping point where the double life could no longer be hidden and it came to the light. But you see this all the time, especially DUI cases. It's very common that when that person is charged and arrested for the DUI, it doesn't mean that they haven't been doing this countless times again and again. Now, one of the questions that this raises for me, and she was a school teacher serving as a public servant in effect for the lives of these 6 and 7-year-olds, is what measures did the school take? There must have been red flags. We know she had 2 prior DUIs. Her family has come out and said that she was a known person to do drugs. So what did the community ignore, and why did they ignore these flags when you're dealing with the most vulnerable population that we have, our children?
And supplying those drugs to a person who ended up dying from a drug overdose, dealing drugs in itself has really serious consequences. But now you tack on this extra layer to this case where a man died from a fatal overdose of fentanyl. What's your reaction to just that trajectory to her dealing drugs into what ended up being a fatal consequence?
I'm surprised it wasn't worse than what it is. Fentanyl is one of the most dangerous drugs we have ever seen. Like 1/10 of fentanyl is about the amount of 1/10 of a penny could kill an entire person. And to put that into context, if I had enough fentanyl just to fit on the tip of my fingernail, that would kill somebody. That's how strong it is. And it can be masked and fit into anywhere. You could put fentanyl in Xanax and it looks just like the drug, and then it takes the person out. So the fact that this drug in pill form was on school property and that a kid didn't die, that more people didn't die from it, I'm surprised. In 2023, we know that 70,000 deaths were as a result of opioid, the majority of which was fentanyl. And to put that into an even more terrifying context, about 22 high school students between the age of 14 and 18 die each week from fentanyl. And she was dealing drugs on school property for an elementary school. Like, as tragic as it is that one person died, thank goodness, it wasn't more and it wasn't any children.
And how prevalent across the states is this problem becoming? Because we've seen a number of stories where these types of things happen, and it just seems to be a growing problem across the U.S. How prevalent are you seeing these types of cases across the United States?
So drug cases in general has been an age-old problem. We saw it in 1971 with the Nixon administration when they did the war on drugs, and that's where we started. In the 1990s, we had DARE, right? But the thing about fentanyl is in the last 10 years, this epidemic has come, and it stemmed from the pharmaceutical issues with the opioid epidemic. In the last 10 years, the manufacturing of it has become very cheap, very easy to do in factories in Mexico. It is very easy to take very small amounts. And like I said earlier, you put them into another pill, you distribute it out to someone. It's a low cost for you as a drug dealer. They get a really strong high, and you hope now that they come back again as a repeat user, wanting that again and again. And that's why we see the rise in the fentanyl epidemic, and especially in the last few years, it's just skyrocketed in terms of how many people are overdosing and how many people are dying, because it's such a small amount that takes you out for life.
And it seems that even in the prosecutor's office, they're taking these cases now more seriously, especially when we see these high-profile cases like Liam Payne, Matthew Perry, even going back to Michael K. Williams from The Wire, where these drug dealers are being held accountable and being prosecuted against when one of their clients dies from a fatal overdose. Do you think that you're also seeing more? Why do you think it is that more prosecutors are taking the cases now more seriously, probably than before?
Because of how dangerous fentanyl is, because of the risk, and it's also a drug that's targeted to our most vulnerable population. We're not hearing about 40-year-old men dying of fentanyl. We're hearing of 14 to 18-year-olds. And just recently, a few months ago, there was a 1-year-old that died from accidentally taking their parents' fentanyl that was in the form of a pill. So because it's so dangerous and it's targeting our youngest population, prosecutors are taking it very seriously, because you want to protect those who haven't even had a chance to make mistakes and to live life so that they're able to do that.
And what type of message do you think it's sending to drug dealers that prosecutors will go after them if this were to happen to them as well too?
This is a really unique message that it's sending, because earlier in especially the history of drug prosecution, you had a situation where federal prosecutors were going after high cartel members. They were going after the big fish to shut them down. They weren't going after the low-level distributors. That typically tended to be something the states would handle, and you wouldn't hear about it publicized in the news. But here you have the situation where a school teacher who is probably very low on the drug dealing rung, her case is taken up by a federal prosecutor. That is very unusual. And it's sending a message, hopefully I think that they want to get across, is we don't care where you are in the rung, whether you're a cartel member or you're the lowest person who decided to deal it once and got really unlucky and caught, we're going to get you. And we're going to make sure that it is as publicized as we can possibly make it, so that we stop you in your tracks and you think twice before you do this.
Yeah, and it's sending a very big message out there. Talk to me also a little bit about the term or the differences between prosecuting a case at the federal level versus prosecuting a case at the state level.
Well, take the school teacher, for example. At the state level, where the school where she taught is Silver Springs, Maryland. It's a population of about 80,000 people. So it's a relatively small community. They're definitely smaller, but it's not New York. There's definitely bigger ones. And in that community, the prosecutors and the defense attorneys, they know each other. They're friends. They interact with each other. And in having that level of camaraderie, it's a lot like Cheers, where it's like, hey, Norm, how are you? So I got this case. What can you give me? My client, they're a really good person. The defense bar is able, I think, a lot of times to get better deals, or with drug cases, it's still the statutory minimum, but you could guarantee you could probably get the statutory minimum for your client in that you had a relationship with that prosecutor. Now, if you move the case to federal court, it's a lot different environment, from just everything about it, from the judges wearing the robes to when you go into federal court, you have to wear a suit. I can even wear this t-shirt. They'd be like, look, you need to have a button-down shirt. That is unacceptable, Ms. Sullivan. Get out of my courtroom. You can't have a phone. You can't have your laptop. Mm-hmm. It's a very serious environment. And that familial nature of, hey, Norm, you're my friend. As a prosecutor, I know you're going to come over to my house Sunday night. What kind of deal can you give my client? That all goes away. Now it's a situation where you are on a very tough playing field if you're the defense bar. And you know that you're going to probably want to try to plead this case as quickly as possible to get your client whatever you can. I think in a situation like this, where you have circumstances that definitely make it where she's not going to have a lenient recommendation, such as somebody died, she's dealing drugs on school grounds, she's a school teacher. For fentanyl, like what the activities that she was engaged in, the mandatory minimum would be 20 years statutorily. You're not going to ask for that as a prosecutor and say, look, it's 30 years that she pleads to, or I take it to trial and she gets life. Which do you prefer? Because a judge is going to side with me. This is a scary case we're dealing with.
Yeah, and facing what could also potentially be that life sentence as well, too. I'm sure the consequences might be kind of clicking for this teacher now that she's behind bars and possibly couldn't get out for a long, long time. Eva, I want to thank you so much for your insight into this case. Before we let you go, though, is there anything else you'd like to add?
You know, I think this is a very interesting and definitely a case that, for me, hits home very hard. I hope the prosecutors take a very strong stance, which they are. Like, I had a brother who died of an opioid overdose a week before his 18th birthday. And that was the reason why I became a prosecutor. So, it touches on so many levels for me, and I'm happy to see that it was taken up federally and that it is treated with the seriousness that we see here, because something has to stop. People can't keep losing their brothers and their children to opioids.
Well, Eva, thank you again so much for telling your story and also for giving insight into this case. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me on the show.
Sarah Magid faces a mandatory minimum of 20 years in prison if she's convicted, and a max sentence of life behind bars. Reporting for Law and Crime, I'm Elizabeth Millner.